Hello, and welcome to an introductory overview of the South Carolina College and Career Ready Standard for World Language Proficiency 2019. I'm Wendy Stevens, and I hope that this information will help you to focus on proficiency in your instructional design and teaching, and that it will also help you to encourage your language learners to focus on their proficiency growth. The mission statement for the South Carolina College and Career Ready Standard for World Language Proficiency 2019 is as follows. All learners can develop and maintain proficiency in at least one other world language, modern, classical, or American Sign Language. In the chosen modern or classical target language, all learners can engage in meaningful intercultural communication using the target language to investigate, interact with, and make connections to products, practices, and perspectives across cultures. All learners can understand and interpret the spoken, written, or signed language, negotiate meaning in conversations, and present information, concepts, and ideas in local and global communities. The can-do statements in the South Carolina College and Career Ready Standard for World Language Proficiency 2019 are measurable goals that provide a roadmap for learner progress on their path to increasing levels of proficiency. Sustained performances over time give an indication as to learner proficiency. There are three different types of can-do statements or statements that begin with I can that make up this roadmap. There are can-do statements that are real-world goals for different types or modes of communication. Preparing students to engage in real-world language functions in these modes is foundational to the standard. These goals are the benchmarks. There are then can-do statements that show how students progress through low, mid, and high proficiency sublevels. Finally, there are can-do statements that serve as examples of actionable objectives for the here and now, for daily tasks that are guided by the benchmarks and indicators and help learners move forward on their path. We refer to all of these can-do statements collectively as the standard. Learners are at the center of all program design and may use the can-do statements to self-assess and to guide their demonstrations of their progress as they grow in proficiency. All of these can-do statements can be found in the documents listed here. The South Carolina College and Career Ready Standard for World Language Proficiency 2019, and the 2016 South Carolina Standard for American Sign Language Proficiency. You can locate these documents at tinyurl.com/SCWL 2021. The can-do statements for modern languages in the 2019 document are an adoption of the 2017 Necessful-Actful can-do statements, and the statements for classics within that document are an adaptation of those statements based on the needs of classics learners. You may be wondering, why can-do statements? What's the purpose of the words I can? When we look at our standard document for guidance, the I can brings our attention back to our learners, keeping them at the center of our program design. It also reminds us that these goals are for students to use to self-assess. At the beginning of a new unit, students may be thinking more along the lines of, I can set a goal to do this. But eventually, they'll be able to look at their work in that unit and say, I can do this, more or less without the teacher's help. And finally, as they gain proficiency, what was once just a goal will be something that they can do consistently. When using the can-do statements in the standard as a guide, students are on the path to proficiency, which is real-world use of language. Think for a moment about the experiences that you've had in your life that have helped shape your language proficiency in any language that you use to communicate. As educators, when we plan with real-world experiences in mind, we are planning with those end proficiency goals in mind, and it shapes the instructional decisions that we make along the way. And when our students put efforts into language learning with real-world goals in mind, it can be a real motivator. Let's consider some of our learners. I see a young man in this image enjoying music. Here I see a group of friends enjoying time together. One also seems to be typing on his computer. He could be writing an email. In this image, I see two ladies having a conversation that could be work-related. And in this image, I see a young woman taking in her surroundings to navigate where she wants to go. These are all examples of real-world language use. The actual proficiency pyramid is displayed with our South Carolina can-do statements in our South Carolina document colors, and with some notes over to the left-hand side on what attaining different levels of proficiency could mean for our learners. You'll notice there that learners at the intermediate low level can survive and cope in a country in which the target language is used. At intermediate mid, learners have limited workability, and at advanced mid, learners are able to satisfy most work requirements. This information is good to share with students who may be hoping to reach the advanced level overnight. It can be informative and actually encouraging for them to know that yes, they can reach the advanced level, but it will take time, and they'll need to engage in lots of experiences in all modes of communication to get there. If we think of all the language functions that people have to do in their jobs, it drives home what proficiency really means. For example, think of a cashier. That person really has to go beyond formulaic phrases to interact well with customers. Greetings are a part of what they do, and circumstances may be familiar, but they also have to determine appropriate questions and handle transactions that may not always look exactly the same. And they have to do all of this with consistency. ACTFL's oral proficiency levels in the workplace is another great graphic to share with learners because, again, it gets them thinking about what each proficiency level really means and how long it may take to reach their goals. Every learner is different, and so of course, their paths to gaining proficiency in interpreting, having conversations, and presenting, and doing so in culturally appropriate ways, can vary. But this chart may help them connect the can-do statements to concepts they already have about how language can be used. This chart on page 8 of the 2019 standard document provides a comparison of performance and proficiency that can assist when thinking about the difference between those performance indicator can-do statements and the proficiency benchmark can-do statements, and using them to plan. You'll notice key words and phrases related to performance, such as based on instruction, contexts are practiced and familiar, and demonstrated for a given task or tasks. Whereas for proficiency, you'll notice key words and phrases such as based on real cultural contexts, contexts are unrehearsed and broad, and sustained performance across all the tasks and contexts for the level. Now, you may have started to realize that working toward proficiency is complex. Our can-do statements aren't just a list of things to check off that we did once or a list of things to memorize. They are goals that guide our decisions for planning and instruction and that guide our learners' efforts toward real-world use of language. These goals have 3 communicative types that we refer to as modes of communication. And those modes are also present in what we call intercultural communication. Let's take a look at the modes of communication and at intercultural communication. Let's think about one of these modes. In this image, I see someone reading signs. Here, I see someone listening to messages through headphones while watching a computer screen. In this image, I see someone reading a book. And in this image, I see someone paying attention to a live speaker. All of these people are engaging in the interpretive mode of communication. They are understanding, interpreting, and analyzing. We have can-do statements that focus on this mode of communication. Let's think about another mode. Here, I see someone chatting over a family meal. In this image, I see some people having a conversation at a public venue. In this next image, I see people communicating in real time via video conference. And in this image, I see people meeting and greeting friends through spontaneous use of language. All of these people are engaging in the interpersonal mode of communication. They are interacting and negotiating meaning to understand and make themselves understood in real time. We have can-do statements that just focus on this mode of communication. Now let's think about the third mode of communication. I see someone here presenting virtually and verbally. In this next image, people are presenting in a face-to-face setting with visuals to a small audience. In this image, someone is preparing work in writing. In this next image, someone is recording a rehearsed song. And in this image, we see a person presenting a speech to a large audience. These people are engaging in the presentational mode of communication. They are presenting information, concepts, and ideas. We have can-do statements that just focus on this mode of communication. I mentioned previously that these three modes of communication, interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational, can be used to engage in intercultural communication. This is where the learner's understandings of the culture that drives language and behavior intersects with their proficiency in the modes. Here, I see people engaging in transactions in different venues. The cultures in which they are communicating inform how they interact. I also see people greeting each other. Culture informs this too. I bet there are many more examples that you can think of where culture drives the language and behaviors that people choose to use. Our can-do statements for intercultural communication empower learners not only to interpret, have conversations, and present, but these goals empower them to work toward interacting effectively and appropriately with people from other language and cultural backgrounds. We have these goals for novice, intermediate, and advanced levels. Note that the learner's intercultural competence and language proficiency may not be at exactly the same level at a given point in time within a particular culture. This is where the two intersect. Major functions of language that you'll notice for intercultural communication are identify for novice, compare for intermediate, and explain for advanced. On this slide, we have an example of one actionable goal or example can-do statement as it spirals from novice to advanced. Note the differences between each. Novice. In my own and other cultures, I can identify how people use their free time and why. Intermediate. In my own and other cultures, I can compare how and why the options for sports and leisure activities vary depending on cultural attitudes. Advanced. In my own and other cultures, I can explain how sports and leisure activities reflect personal and national identity. Speaking of examples for intercultural communication, remember that those are our actionable goals that can serve as lesson or task objectives. You'll see that they come in pairs, which is different from how the examples are listed with the modes of communication. They are listed in pairs for the aspects of investigate and interact, or connect for classics. Here are some examples linking investigation and interaction. These are intended to be explored in tandem. Investigate. In my own and other cultures, I can identify how people use their free time and why. Interact. I can participate in a sport with peers of the target culture by observing and imitating them. The way that our can-do statements are organized is very much tied to the role that each type of can-do statement plays. Proficiency benchmarks, which appear in a summary page as well as at the top of other pages in the document, are those end goals for real-world language use. Performance indicators, which have their own summary pages for each mode and level, are those goals for the learning path that you might tie to units of study to guide experiences and design within a unit. Examples are the only can-do statements that are customizable. In the document, they are listed underneath the indicators with which they align. These are actionable objectives that the teacher can associate with a particular lesson or task. Here's an image to show how the overview of proficiency benchmarks for modern languages on page 12 of the 2019 standard document appear. This image is not meant to be read from this slide, but just to show the layout. You can see that at the top, from left to right, the columns are labeled for novice, intermediate, and advanced. And over to the left, the rows are labeled for interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational communication, followed by interact and investigate for intercultural communication. The spaces in the table include the corresponding proficiency benchmark can-do statements. All of the examples to follow regarding the can-do statements are from this same document. Here we have the same layout for classics, but with connect instead of interact. Also, we refer to intercultural interpretation instead of intercultural communication. On this next slide, we can see an example of a performance indicator's summary page. There is one of these for each mode and level. This example shows novice interpretive. Notice that the benchmark to which these align appears at the very top, and there appear to be 3 horizontal bands of indicators beneath it with a question above each. These questions are function questions. Functions are the communicative tasks that students do in the language, and these same broader categories of functions appear for each level for a given mode. Here is the same type of page, but for intermediate interpretive. Notice that the function questions have not changed. The indicators have, though, because now we are in intermediate. The performance indicators spiral from novice to advanced, and they also spiral from low to high within each level. Here's the indicator summary page for advanced interpretive. Again, the function questions are the same. Let's think about the organization of each individual indicator. Each indicator for every level, every mode, begins with I can, and is followed by a function, a context, and information about how well the function is to be done within the context. Here's an example of a novice high performance indicator for the interpersonal mode. I can interact with others to meet my basic needs. That's the function. In what context? In contexts related to routine everyday activities. And how well can I do this? I can do it using simple sentences and questions most of the time. You may be curious about the sublevel breakdown. We can think of it like this. High shows performance at the next level most of the time. Mid shows strong performance for a given level. Low is barely meeting the criteria for a given level. The wording of the can-do statement indicators and examples helps us drill down to what this looks like for different functions. And this is one of the reasons why having the low, mid, high spiraling is so useful. How can educators use all of these can-do statements to plan? The can-do statements are not a curriculum, but they do help us make informed decisions for course articulation, course design, and daily learning objectives. Since proficiency benchmarks are goals for real-world language use, we can use them to help us determine long-term goals or goals for courses with our professional language teams. This helps articulate learning programs. Once proficiency learning targets have been determined, performance indicators may be used as goals that inform unit design. Finally, once performance indicators are associated with units of study, the example can-do statements that align with those indicators may be used and customized to meet student needs and to address student interests. Depending on the lesson design, teachers could even plan to give students choices of can-do statements that all align to the same indicator. There are lots of possibilities for using these to help students take ownership of their learning path. If you're wondering, how can I help my students understand and get excited about their proficiency? You may want to explore the South Carolina kid-friendly performance task rubrics and proficiency growth charts. These charts focus on some of the more salient aspects of proficiency growth and bring in a game-like way of thinking about leveling up. You can download them by going to tinyurl.com/scwlgrow2021. Thank you for your engagement with this presentation. Resources for implementation can be found at tinyurl.com/scwlresources2021. As you consider ways to guide your learners toward real-world language use, I hope that you'll have conversations with colleagues and language learners about what proficiency growth can look like. And I hope that the proficiency benchmarks, performance indicators, and example can-do statements will help you and your students as you move forward.